glaube, das ist... Oh, jetzt bin ich... Wir fangen dann an. So good morning, everybody, and welcome back to our third day of the conference. I hope you all had a good evening yesterday, also those that enjoyed the dinner. At some stage, people sort of disappeared, and we found out that they were using the photo box and had good fun with the photo box. Maybe we get some pictures for the final wrap-up together. And to share this with us. Yeah, today we have one more day with very exciting contributions. We have two keynotes in the morning, and they will be introduced following me. We have a coffee break after that, and then we have 8 sessions, again the same format, 4 sessions in parallel, coffee break, lunch break, and then the last block of 4 sessions. Followed by a coffee break, and then we reconvene again here in the plenary and have the poster award ceremony. Looking forward to that. Lots of exciting posters yesterday. I thought I'd been through all of them, but then I realized there were additional rooms, so I screened through those later in the afternoon. It's impressive work. So I really look forward to that as well. And then we have a wrap-up discussion. And that will also be quite interesting, what we condensed out of this rich event of 3 days. And also try to see where we want to go in the future with this format, but also, of course, research-wise. Yes, perhaps one more remark regarding the excursions tomorrow. We have 2 excursions. One will bring us to the patch crop experiment. The title is Harvesting the Future, Agroecosystem Transformation Through Crop Diversification and Digital Technologies. You see the time when we depart here, 8 o'clock, also where we depart. If you don't know where this is, please contact the registration desk. It's in front of this building, but to be absolutely sure, if you are having questions, please contact the colleagues. Planned estimated arrival time back from the excursion at the airport is 5 o'clock. And if you want to come back here, it will be about half an hour later. And the other excursion brings you to the north, more to the northeast of the state of Brandenburg. The title here is From Organic to Conventional. It's not from conventional to organic, apparently organic to conventional. Insights, farms and research of agricultural landscapes in the northeast of Germany. Departure is a little earlier because the distance is a bit further, and you also see the estimated arrival times at the airport and here at the venue or at the location. You can bring your luggage. Apparently, if you go to the airport right away, you need to bring your luggage. It can be sort of put in the buses, and you will also receive lunch boxes, so you don't need to worry about food or bring any food. Food will be provided during the excursion. Okay, and with this, I would like to hand over to Jesús to introduce the first keynotes, and I wish us all a good and exciting third day of the conference. Thank you.
Good morning to all. My name is Jesús Barreiro-Hurlé, and I work at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre in Seville, dealing with the transformation of the food systems towards more sustainable from an economic and socio-economic perspective. Today I have the honor to chair this last set of keynote speakers representing the visions and technology tracks of this conference. I would like to thank Dr. Ewert and the organizing committee for having me chosen as part of the scientific committee of this conference, and it's been great to see how the work that we've been doing for the last year and a half is taking shape. We are very lucky to have today with us two great speakers, and I guess that the proof is in the pudding, and you will see if they are up to our expectations at the end of the session. The first one is Professor Michelle Chevelev-Bonatti. She is an associate professor of environmental sociology in the University of Vila Velha in Brazil. And in Germany, she is the deputy head of the Sussland group at ZALF and also lectures at the Humboldt-Universität of Berlin, where she earned her PhD in life sciences. She focuses mostly on how innovation happens and has a broad experience in the global south, including Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And among the many distinctions she has had in her career, I think that being selected as research leader on sustainable transformations in the face of climate change by GPI Climate Norway is outstanding. Today she will be talking about the pathways for co-creation of knowledge, trying to understand how these can allow for the transformation of the food system, and trying to see if there's some kind of patterns emerging in the global north and the global south. So without further ado, Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jesús, for the kind presentation. I wanted also to extend my gratitude to the organization and Professor Ewert for having me here as a keynote. And thank you for the audience to be here today. In the presentation today, we will, as Jesús just mentioned, explore a little bit what are the different patterns of social learning for natural resources management are emerging in different geopolitical conditions, mainly global north and global south. I know that after 2 days of great conference and excellent presentations and debates, most of you might be now familiar with co-creation, co-production, living labs approach. So I will give you a very first overview of the setting and the momentum that co-creation as a research topic has. And then we go very much more deep in the analysis through a just recent publication that we have done. Land use and natural resources management projects has increasingly highlighting the importance of co-creation, of strategies based on the creation of learning spaces. This has been emerged in a context that we try to rely in technocratic models that are applied based in hierarchical or vertical linear conceptualizations of knowledge transfer. And I want to be very clear here, we are not against technological advancements, the opposite. Technological advancements and technological understanding of ecological dynamics are undoubtedly very important. They had helped us to advance and solve even many of our problems. But technocratical models tend to not transcend technological knowledge, and we need more complex solutions for our crisis nowadays. So co-production is rapidly endeavor growing in diverse fields, for example, health, not only agriculture, but health, also industry and any others. Broadly, it seeks to connect researchers and diverse social actors to collaboratively and interactively produce knowledge, actions, and societal changes. The promise is certainly very compelling. Who would be against to developing solutions through a more legitimate process that draw on diversity of expertise with, by, and for those who use them? So in this frame, in this context, a lot of funds have been destinated to co-creation projects or for projects that added co-creation as one key element in agriculture and in other fields. But what if there is already a lot of effective models that are already operating? what would be these models of learning be? What would be these models of co-creation be? Are they linked to the geopolitical conditions? Would they be different than in the global south than in the global north? If so, how they can characterize them? Those questions are guiding our discussion today, are also guiding the research that I will present to you later on. So our background study, as I said, is a recently published global analysis that involves almost 50 countries, where we try to find patterns of learning in different geopolitical conditions. I wanted to acknowledge here that with me there is a team of other 20 researchers, someone of them here, like Professor Schlindwein, and we have a very interdisciplinary team that goes from economists, mathematicians, data analysts, geographers, social scientists, pedagogues, and agronomists, of course. So this interdisciplinary team tried to find what are the patterns of learning in different sociological conditions and also different geopolitical conditions. Let's start to clarify some concepts. The meaning and the outcomes of co-production remain very ambiguous. It has been used in different fields and based also in very different terminologies that include, for example, reflexive governance, social learning, which is the key here, the co-design, transdisciplinary, participatory action research. This variety of approaches with different goals, theories, practice, and outcomes make very tricky to have some conceptual clarity. And again, to be clear here, this non-rigid fluidity of the concept is important to advance science, but also using this with so many different approaches and especially lacking systematic, extensive, empirical analysis, risk framing co-production as a panacea. Just to give you a brief overview of one of the key concepts that we use in co-production, which is social learning, the key here today. Social learning as a concept have more than 60 years, like 6 decades of development. It emerged on the 60s with Alberto Bandura from educational science. And since then, over the decades, it has been evolved very differently in different disciplines, even becoming different schools. One of the schools here, on the one side you can see, is the school that talk about social learning, for example, as a modeling our behavior in groups and social groups. This is the key concept that, for example, people use in criminology, which is very far from how we see social learning in sustainable science, where we think about a more constructivist approach, understanding social learning as a co-creation, as a knowledge, as a relational capital emerging. So just going through the genealogy of the term, during the 80s, social learning has been very much promoted by organizational science and system thinking. On the 90s, it has been very much embraced as a key component of sustainable natural resources management, trying to avoid command and control approach. And on the 2000s, this has been very much established as a key component of sustainable development, for example, with the creation of several institutions like UNESCO Chair for Social Learning and Sustainable Development. Going further on the concerns and challenges of co-creation, there is even more concerns when we talk about co-creation among Global North and Global South. The difference between the traditional participatory approach and the new co-creation approach are far from clear. Growing concerns also go over how co-production and social learning efforts can continue increasing inequalities and power imbalances. And there is also some skepticism how new it is and if it has been also used as a new form of coloniality or scientific extractivism. So we need more empirical guidance that are not limited by the scope, but include a lot of empirical evidence, so we can have a clear comparative approach of how differences of social learning and co-creation are occurring around the world. Our study was very much guided by the question of if and how social learning is occurring in different geopolitical contexts. We wanted to understand if we can really find the patterns of learning, as it's also learning is very subjective. It's very challenging to identify patterns, especially in such a huge sample. We wanted to know then if it's possible to define archetypical pathways of social learning and natural resources management, and how they occur in different social and geopolitical conditions. The part of a working hypothesis based on 3 main studies that we were involved that show that there is a potential emergence of different kinds of social learning-based and initiatives led by communities living in adverse socioeconomic conditions in the Global South. This indicates us that there is some different patterns of relational dynamics among the social actors that were occurring on the Global South. Again, very important clarification here. I know that Global South and Global North, there's a lot of limitations as a concept. It has been mainly defined as a concept that helps us to group countries that has low income, for the Global South, low income, dense population, poor infrastructure, a colonial past, minority exclusions, and also very much suffering of marginalization process. Although we have this limitation, because some countries cannot be classified, for example, China, as North or South exactly, this still represents one of the big advancements and letting behind the developing and developed countries concept. So that's why we use this concept to guide us, and also as a possibility to group such an amount of data. But recognize that there is limitations here, and there is a lot of norths on the south and a lot of souths in the north. Very briefly about the methodology, we did a basic research that followed the archetype analysis as a methodology. So we developed the analytical framework that I will explain you further. We do a study case selections, study case classification, then we cluster and define the archetypes based on statistical correlations. The analytical framework, that was the challenge, how we analyze each one of the social learning cases that we have around the world. We defined some attributes. This is, of course, a combination of several different authors. We defined the attributes in 3 main dimensions: geopolitical context, inputs and outputs of the process of social learning. In terms of geopolitical context, we look at the geopolitical location, the country, and the continent. In terms of input, how the process of learning was structured, we looked to which kind of participants were involved, what was the target outcome of the process, like what was defined as outcome that should be on the beginning, the objective of the process, if there were financial resources availability, which natural resource was targeted, and which methods they use. In terms of output, we look at relational capital. For example, if the group has increased environmental knowledge, if the critical thinking has been increased, if social cohesion has been increased, and if there was conflicts on the process. Basically, protocol of systematic literature review, you might be very familiar with this, with a partner of more than 4,000 articles. And through the process of exclusion, we arrived to 109 articles that represents 135 cases, because some articles represent more than one case, because they were comparative analysis. What did we find? The positive correlations with strong to moderate effects among the variables indicate that we can find at least two patterns, so two archetypes, that they can be characterized as endogenous social learning and exogenous social learning. Endogenous social learning, it's because it's mainly led by community people, so people that are inside of the territories, and exogenous social learning we classified because it's led for external actors. And the term endogenous social learning, it's not found it on the peer-reviewed literature, but it's found, at least from our research, in one technical report of the CGRs that also mentioned that there is this occurrence of community-led learning process. More in depth, what we find on the correlations, what are the characteristics of those two kinds of social learning? In the case of exogenous, the positive correlations are the green one here, you can see. So it's mainly appear on the global north, mostly in Europe. It's very much led by general stakeholders, or we can also say institutional representatives. It's very much has a relational capital, the increase of environmental knowledge. It's use pre-designed or pre-established methods, so a clear structure of methods from the beginning, and has financial resource available, and it focuses in the majority, or the most correlation here is related to ecosystems as a natural resource, which is not an S resource, but we use this category to group them. And in terms of endogenous social learning, we had quite a contrast. We have mainly appearing on the global south, mostly in Latin America, very much led by community individuals, which was also the initial working hypothesis, very much focused on community development. We had a much more a variety of relational capital appearing. So you have, for example, overall participation as a strength. You have critical think and environmental knowledge. The methods, and this is something interesting to also highlight, the methods is much more based on learning by doing, which is associated for this scarcity of financial resources. So over the 137 cases that we have, 90 could be classified as exogenous social learning, having this clear pattern. 33 could be classified as endogenous social learning, and 14 could not be classified because they do not follow a specific patterns. So here probably, for example, there's a possibility, of course, other patterns that our study with this framework could not capture. In terms of more like geographic division, here you can see the more red, it's more endogenous, and more blue, more exogenous, and you see a clear distinction between global north. In the case of endogenous social learning, we have very much the link with Latin America, as I said, and while endogenous appear much more in Europe. In the discussions, we will see that this is much more associated, for example, to grassroots movement, which is one of the key characteristics of the learning process in Latin America. Some key points to reflect. Exogenous social learning is very much, as we said, established among external actors. And those social actors has coming from a context that has suffered much less exclusion and marginalization by the existing governance systems, potentially showing this more symmetric power relations. It comes in a context of interactions historical interactions of institutional representatives in multi-stakeholder networks. These stakeholders or institutional representatives, they tend to follow a pre-designed agenda, and it's much less related to community or territorial development specifically. There is also another authors that reinforce this kind of patterns and North institutions networks for sustainable natural resource management. In the case of endogenous social learning, more appearing in the Global South, it emerged in a context of structural exclusion and neglection. The communities that are facing, and most of them are the protagonists on the cases that we analyze, the community facing is failing or absence of functional governance systems or inadequate public policies. They develop their own innovative systems of self-construct learning. This comes in a context where there is a self-designed process of social learning that emerge on the scarcity of financial resources. It's very much related to a collective learning centered on the community needs and their significant universe, and in the construction of identity as an empowerment process, but this is very much based on their rationalities and their self-structures and their self-determined priorities. This kind of local development, and here I wanted to highlight, there is a lot of interfaces between the school of, for example, endogenous development and social learning endogenous. This kind of local development that we see in the social learning and the Global South comes in a context of facing multiple crises. And it's possibly show us about communities that are handling intersected process of exclusion, intersectional issues like racism, gender, they are also appearing on those cases, showing that this process, they come along to the process of natural resources management. They are not the key goal, they come along to the process. It brings to some questions like, for you, do the policies and research-based and exogenous approach are undervaluing and underlooking the occurrence of other potential learning, like the endogenous social learning mechanisms? We have to advance the understanding of other mechanisms or deeper mechanisms of social learning, for example, the endogenous social learning, not only to promote a sustainable or land use projects and sustainable resources management that avoid replication of coloniality, but also to promote more legitimate and effective process. We have so much funds being now destined for co-production. It's such a momentum. We can explore maybe how more effectively we can apply those funds considering different kind of approach for learning. This helps us to move what Habermas say as instrumental rationality to communicative rationality, a more communicative action with the local actors that we are trying to involve in our projects. Finally, and very important, the idea here is not dichotomize, neither present what is the best model of social learning to be supported. The idea is show that there is a diversity of social learning models and potentially a diversity of models or different models that are emerging from different territories and learning models that might be invisible for us now because, for the broader world, because of their peripheral or neglected territory of origin. So the idea here is how we see learning as a complementary process with different kind of models and also valuing the idea of being more pluriverse. Finally, in the Global South, endogenous social learning should be better taped as an instrument of development and a catalyzer of deliberative process for sustainable natural resources management and land use. As research advances, robust situated soft learning models must be supported with intentional founding efforts to make the engagement of local institutions and rationalities. So then we can avoid overinvestment in a limited number of organizations that apply exogenous structures where endogenous process is already operating effectively and is being more adequate. I wanted to close with a little example. Let me get distance of the slides. Probably also most of you are familiar with agroforestry. Agroforestry nowadays, it's one system, agricultural production system that is a key component or are one of the key strategies of many of our projects. Some decades ago, this kind of system, for example, 4 decades ago, this kind of system, which also comes from peripheral territories or neglect territories and marginalized populations as indigenous people, was very much, has much less credibility than nowadays. If you do a parallel with endogenous social learning process, I believe that we can have the same development here. There is a lot of different systems that we do not believe that are possible. For example, do systems that are based on learning by doing, for example. It is very challenging in science. But this kind of credibility that now we think that is difficult, if you take the example of agroforestry, for example, how it has evolved and been incorporated in our projects nowadays, we can maybe understand that it's possible, and that it's possible that we have a co-production process of knowledge in our projects that is more fair and include better the voices of the ZALF. Thank you very much. I will be very glad to hear your comments, critiques, and questions.
So now we will take questions from the audience. Let's start from the back. Gentleman with the
Jens Dauber, Thünen Institute. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I have one question on the endogenous social learning. Is there a chance that the amount of this archetype in the global north was underestimated? Because usually, as you explained how they work, these initiatives usually are not published in a way, so it's probably very difficult to identify them. And if so, would this final conclusion you made on the endogenous learning in the global south also apply to the global north? So would you also have here to put more emphasis on this type of learning systems?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, my first answer would be yes. As I said before, there is a lot of ZALF also in the north, and I think, especially, for example, this issue that you just mentioned about not have found the quantities. The literature certainly is not reporting this 30 cases that we found. There are probably much more. If the cases that we analyze are led by communities, communities are probably not concerned and publish this in peer-review literature. So this is a very much underestimated number. Like we are lucky that we find those 30 cases representing the endogenous patterns. And I believe certainly that the logic, for example, of doing more adaptative methodologies to engage the articles, which is the actors, as the endogenous process proposed, is very much valuable for North context too. But how to do this, how to test it, it's also one of the key challenges, and challenges for us as research to try to apply those different models in the global North too. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I'm going to talk from the perspective of innovation.
Okay.
I have been part of a network called Promoting Local Innovation, where you...
Sorry, I cannot hear you. Can you...
There is a network called Promoting Local Innovation that works a lot on local innovation. And a lot of the innovators, whether individual or groups, are people who, for one reason or another, have had either exchange visits or maybe migrants that went somewhere else and came back with an idea, and then they relocalize in their own context. And from this, I would think that the process of social learning is there are phases where you are within your community. There are phases where you get input maybe from even a chance visit or somebody from the family that traveled somewhere and came back with something. So a lot of the models are not one or the other. They are in between. I am a bit surprised that in your literature review, you have so few cases that are in between. I would say most processes are hybrid processes. And like migration, as you know, in many places, I live in Mexico where migration is a structural issue for society. Many people go back and forth between different worlds or different cycles. So there is not one or the other, and there is not a better model.
Yeah.
They really can take any idea that is useful and find networks, groups, family members, whoever. I don't know if you have any feedback on this.
Sure, for sure, sure. I just highlight, and I'm highlighting again that I'm not promoting a better social learning model. I really believe that there is much more cases than we could report by doing a systematic literature review, simply because they are not reported as a peer-review article. And I also believe that there is also, if you look over a longer period of time, an endogenous process can become an exogenous process. Definitely, but as the literature review, we can patronize on those two kinds. And I think what is important as a message here, it's finding potential phases, if you wanted to classify it endogenous and exogenous as phase, as a process of learning over the decades. Eventually they start at a community level or initiated by the community level, and later on they integrated the different kind of expertise, which is very interesting also as a model for us. So combining those two in research is one of the things that we could try to do. Let's start with the endogenous model, and then we pass to the exogenous process. So definitely, I just agree with you what Heavy saying. I also believe that if you look in a longer period of time, endogenous can become exogenous. Yeah, depends a little bit from where they come from. I think, for example, in the case of many social movements in Latin America, like, for example, La Via Campesina, I think they have a kind of resistance to integrate external actors, but because of their political views. But I think in most of the case, I would say that you can combine both approaches. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Yes, I think that there is a lot of example of endogenous and after exogenous, even in the north also. But my question is, you speak about co-production and co-creation. I'm part of the project Modernakis, and we try to make a clear definition of co-production and co-creation, because in our idea, co-production is more like a top-down kind of approach, and co-creation is more about bottom-up. But I don't, when you make your presentation, the concept of co-production and co-creation was not clear enough. Could you tell me, from your point of view, what is the difference for you about co-creation and co-production, and if you share this kind of approach we have here?
Very interesting. I think what I try to also bring in the beginning is exactly this variety of conceptualizations of co-production. For example, some people believe that, or use the concept of co-production that, for example, I brought here in the beginning, bring together different kind of expertise, researchers to different social actors to collaborative produce knowledge and societal change. This is a very broad concept. But there is a lot of theories, and that's the point, because co-production has been used a lot of different concepts, a lot of different schools. And I think that is the risk that we have in science, that we use co-production as any term that everybody can use without establishing what are the terminologies and also paradigms that you have on the research that you're doing. So I appreciate that you bring the two different concepts. Here we use as a very broad definition exactly to criticize how it's being used differently by engaging different kind of scholars, and also eventually neglecting many of the authors that have been working with co-production for decades and not have been classified this as a co-production. I just wanted to mention Paulo Freire, which work a lot with learning with the communities, and he was not classified this as a co-production. So I think this is also one of the critiques, is like how we classify it and how we clearly define the co-production in each one of the projects that we are implemented. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Michelle. It came to my mind then also in terms of outscaling, no? That there is outscaling models and social learning is really important. Where do you see also the role of research? Is it also possible then later on to have these kind of social learning generalized models that you can say, yes, maybe without research it might be also possible with this knowledge what we have generated, especially in Latin America, of course. I don't know, do you have success stories here that one really say, yes, it is also possible to work with endogenous models more, and also to have maybe lower than the investment you talked about it at the very end. It just came into my mind. Yes. Thank you,
Stefan. Thank you very much. Well, I think we can use endogenous social learning as approach for our projects. We have to try to avoid the contradiction, because if social learning is mainly emerging from the communities and we are proposing it as exogenous actors, we might be creating what it's just mentioned, like a hybrid model. And I think this is exactly, to scale up these models, I think we need to create more hybrid models. I would not scale up from the science perspective only the endogenous process, because this would be incoherent with the nature of endogenous social learning, which is created by emerging from the local, not from the outside. But this would be an interesting model to scale up and to test, for example, with our research projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this clarification. Davide Rizzo, landscape agronomist. I was captivated by that term that you use, geopolitical context. Is scientific diplomacy a way of conducting this agenda on choosing where to develop endogenous or exogenous social learning? Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat your question? I do not understand.
Sorry, there could be a soft power led by scientific diplomacy. I mean, some northern countries keeping their nexus, their connection with southern countries, instead of being with a colonial approach, they could want to develop a soft power by supporting the knowledge production locally under a scientific diplomacy approach, so a soft approach for a new way of keeping this divide. I don't know, it's a background question, but it was for your geopolitical context. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting question. I heard somewhere, and I think it's very, very true for our projects, coloniality, which is a very specific kind of term here. I don't know if you're familiar to this. It's reproduced through very subtle mechanisms. So I think, yes, we might be reproducing a lot of coloniality without intention, with best intentions that we have. And I think it's addressing the geopolitical position here. It's one of the attempts to try to escape the trap of coloniality, because everybody is emergent in this structural coloniality. So it still remains from our past. It's very much clear in our mental models. It's clear in the way that we do research. So I would definitely agree that the projects that we are eventually promoting are promoting coloniality and highlighting the geopolitical conditions and the local systems of knowledge is one of the ways to try to avoid the trap. Reflexivity, it's one of the big, individual reflexivity is one of the big skills to try to avoid coloniality, but we are all emerged on the coloniality and on this kind of mindsets. Thank you for bringing the point. Thank you.
Yeah, Michelle, thank you very much for the excellent presentation and really fascinating topic. And that's kind of reflection and then a question. So like from a European farmer perspective, I would say that endogenous social learning process that you described is kind of like present everywhere. I would say the mic is not, is present everywhere. And we often see maybe only the results in the end, that we see kind of like clusters of things emerging, but we not always understand what was the mic is not working anymore.
We have micro here.
Another attempt. We observe often that clusters emerge, that things happen, but not always understand what was the process, how this emerged. And we also from the outside often not observe what are the success factors that some things actually can emerge. And I find that fascinating, also your research and presentation in that context, because to me it's also still very unclear what's the role of that exogenous shock, so to say, that somebody said, what is the role of research in that? Do we make things better? Do we make things sometimes worse by enforcing our co-creation processes? I mean, maybe farmers alone would be sometimes more efficient. And what is your perspective on that, in the sense of what is the role of research in feeding in these processes, identifying that they are there, and also what is the role of policy? I mean, what can policymakers do to kind of like get the best out of these processes that are there and tap on their big potential? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this great question. I also receive a question like that I'll just share because it goes along with what you have saying. If our funds are corrupting the process of learning because they come to donors that has pre-designed agendas, and we try to engage people who have other agendas but are interested to collaborate with us. So this is a key question. I would say that one of the key focus of research now is explore better how transformation happened on the ground on already ongoing cases. This involves a lot of understanding transformative pedagogies. This is one of the key things. We are all trying to do co-creation of knowledge, learning process, and we rarely have space for educators or pedagogues in our projects to really understand how people learn. So I think this is one thing to address with our research projects, to have more really science of learning, like with disciplinary science of learning in our projects, that we are not only all agronomists trying to do learning process with our backgrounds. I think this is important for our research projects. In terms of policies, I think there have to be more space. I think we have to advocate also for this kind of foundings that gives us space to design better our agenda. We have too much. I know it's a constraint for most of us, and we have to address the social challenge, socio-ecological challenge that we have, so we have to have kind of goals. I completely understand it from the policy perspective, but this is generating problems and this creation of transformation problems, the process. So I think we have a kind of contradictory process here, and being aware of it, I think it's very important so we can start to advocate better for different kind of foundings. There is already initiatives on this regard. There is some foundings, for example, that are open with a much bigger topic, but not so much those specific lines for application. So there is initiatives, there is some movement in this direction. There is even the last EKI initiative, which requests have 70% of the foundings apply on the countries. So 70% of the big budget of EKI it's been destinated direct to local institutions. I think those are mechanisms that policy can help, but there is a contradiction when we wanted to create transformative process with so much pre-design or pre-established agenda. Thank you.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
So thanks, Michelle, for the great and cool talk. So I was wondering about authorship, because you analyzed literature. So I was wondering, like, maybe if the authors describing cases from the Global South were actually from the Global South, from the research institutes there, or was it more researchers coming from Europe, the US, or whatever? And maybe what's your opinion that there might be a bias how they describe things in the cases they analyze?
Thank you very much for this tricky point. We had a lot of discussions about this because the narrative there on the process, in many of the cases, we did not analyze, we didn't like a quantitative analysis from where the endogenous process articles exactly come from according to the authorship. But there is a lot of discussions during the process to who is telling this narrative about the process. Also to not sell, because researchers, they have to sell good results and the potentials of the process. We know it, we have a lot of pressure to show results, to show outcomes. And in many of those cases of endogenous social learning might be much more difficult than what we have seen. We don't want to romanticize here how good is endogenous process. In the cases, especially on the cases that we know, particularly that we know the context, we know that those communities, although they have done this process with a very successful net resources management, I can give you some numbers for specific cases that we know, but we know that those communities still live in marginalization process, and what they would say about the endogenous process and how it can really be a powerful mechanism for transformation. This is a question mark for us because we don't have it. Who is leading the peer review research are mainly not the communities. Yeah. Thank you for bringing the point. I think we have two there. Hi, Tony.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Maybe this is a complementary question to what Robert was just asking. You're a lecturer at Humboldt-University, and I wonder what's the takeaway for you from your own research for your teaching to the next generation of researchers, so that we don't make the mistakes of the past and sort of reinforce this neocolonialism that you found in your research, and maybe that exists a lot today. And on the flip side, what would you like early career researchers to take away from this for research that they want to do by themselves in the context of the global north or global south, so that we're not making the mistakes that you found in your research?
Thank you. It's a complex question. I think there is one key point that I also addressed there on the other answer. I think we need to much more understand resilience, for example, transformation where it is already being occurring. And we have the frame that global south or marginalized population needs to be supported, but they maybe also can teach us a lot about resilience as they have been suffering so much exclusion. And I think a deeper look on it, it's very important for the next research steps. And that's what I mentioned also, not only the models that are already emerging from the South, which gives us also this context, comes in this context of pluriversal, like what are the different models that are already operating that are invisible there? I think this is very much one research line that has to be reinforced. My experience in teaching is an institution in Brazil and also here in Germany. And from my perspective, I have seen the students that are living in this catastrophical perspective of future very much eager to understand different models, to escape the repetition of research that we have been promoting. So I think for this generation especially, there is a lot of room to try different models, risk more, try different methods. I'm just seeing Erica with storytelling here. She presenting this kind of methods that we are not used because I understand we have a lot of pressure of rigor of scientific methods and applications, and we have been all, being formatted by rigor and neutrality. But in the context that we are living and facing the multiple crises, we need to try different models. And I think this is in different areas of research, we need to try different models. I think this is one of the key messages. Thank you. We have that.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle, for a really exciting talk. I was wondering whether the difference between your endogenous and your exogenous learning cases might be also due to the absence or presence of an enabling environment. That's one question. The second related question is probably who's constituting the learning requirements? So I was wondering whether these exogenous learning situations might be divided up in those where there is some kind of supportive outside setting and other situations where the learning requirements or needs might be enforced by outside developments. So that communities are put in a situation where they have to adapt, for example, to certain developments which they would not choose on their own. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the agenda in the case of endogenous, the exogenous, as I said, is pretty much determined. I think this is one of the key factors that we see on this. If I understood your question right, you're going this point, right? How the learning content is designed or added to this experience. The pre-design outcomes that what we analyze, which was also very difficult. From the attributes, there are some that were much more difficult to analyze, for example, relational capital, than what kind of participants. And in the case of the content or what we call it target outcome on the process, there is a lot of influence on the exogenous process on the donors, so this pre-design agenda. So this is what has to be learned about. If it's about water, it's about water, and everybody goes about water. That's why it's so much different in terms of community development, what we saw in the endogenous process. And I think this is one of the limitations that we have to really co-create solutions for multiple processes that are in our day-by-day. And the first question I forgot. I'm sorry. Could you repeat, please? Yeah, I think it's exactly what goes to the same point. It's exactly also this historical context that I try to address, or, for example, enabling conditions. If you think about, for example, power relations, how people come to the table to negotiate, what are the multiple stakeholders that are negotiated. Here in Germany, you have much more historical network of multiple stakeholders negotiating their net resources management, which is very much different. And the enabling conditions here, the settings of power relation, even though they are also here, of course, in Germany and other countries, there is difference when you have politicians and farmers on the same table. But in the global south, this distance of power, this imbalance of power is much stronger. So here the labeling environment is really influencing a lot on this or this other kind of social learning models. Thank you very much.
We have time for one last question then.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. This is based on peer-reviewed articles, right?
Yes, only peer-reviewed articles.
So how do you think about how we can learn if it's social learning? Because I think there is a lot of information in different languages, in different gray literature. How could we learn ourselves from that instead of reinventing a new social learning within science?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the idea is actually it's not reinventing, but recognize what is already operating with this terminology. And there is very clear limitations on the structure of this research. For example, having articles only in English. We already exclude a lot of what is going on in Latin America, which even in English we see that there is already like a kind of development process occurring that has to be analyzed, and we didn't analyze any language that's not English. This is one of the limitations. Peer review, it's another limitation. So for the message that we're trying to bring, which is what are the different emerging experience that we can learn from, having peer review and English literature has a big impact in our results. And this is very much recognized also on the limitations of this study. But what we want, and this is a strategic message here too, is also bring this message to science. And science value very much if you have a peer review script on English. So this was a kind of strategic article, because we know, I think many of you that are working in different contexts know that there is a lot of interesting experience come from the communities, and we can learn with their approach. But the way that we look this in science, in research, is different. And these articles try to do this, and that's why I use this methodology. So we don't want to value what we already saw on the field, but we wanted to publish with a strong systematic literature review. We're analyzing correlations, the statistical correlations, that we can bring this message further. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. He will be there.
No, where's your map?
My map.
I want to take out from Michel's presentation and linking with the first day is the blank of Canada. And I would love to know how would you classify the living lab experience that was presented by Francois on Tuesday. That seems...
That's a final big question. Okay. We have to talk. No, actually, there was one more question for you too. But you said that, for example, you have living labs on the 14 initiatives. Also, there are 14 living labs, right? And one is led by indigenous communities, right? And this is what I wanted to know, because I have to know more about the case in specific, but I have the feeling that exactly those two kinds of maybe social learning operating. Maybe in the indigenous knowledge, if I associate with the results and territories of neglection, this could be a kind of endogenous process occurring, maybe. And maybe the others are more exogenous. I think Francois can help me. I will test this.
So open that discussion.
Great.
Thank you to help.
Thank you.
So this takes us to a second keynote speaker. That would be Professor Teja Tscharntke. He's a professor of agroecology at Göttingen since 1993, which is a way to hide the fact that he's been already nearly 31 years teaching agroecology. He has a master both in sociology and biology, and he's specialized on landscape perspectives on biodiversity patterns and associated ecosystems. As the same as our first keynote speaker, Teja has been awarded multiple recognitions by different ecological societies, both in the UK and in the German-speaking countries, and he will be talking today about the possibility to have high biodiversity and high agricultural production. And that, I believe, is a very relevant topic at a moment where we are focusing a lot on food security in terms of productivity without taking into account food security in terms of long-term stability, with the argument that if we want to be biodiverse, we have to produce less. So, Teja, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, and of course, thank you also very much for inviting me for this keynote lecture, Frank, and also the organization team, and I'm happy to present a few ideas on how biodiversity-friendly agricultural landscape can exist without yield loss or without too much yield loss. It's a critical question, I know, and I try to answer it with examples from our work over the last 30 years and give some examples on that. So when it comes, as everybody, as you all know, biodiversity shows a dramatic decline, and agriculture is very well known as a main driver of the biodiversity crisis. So this is a challenging topic. I differentiate here three cases. First is enhancing biodiversity at the cost of productivity, which is usually the case in, for example, in EU or North American cereal production, because their yield gaps are very small and it is highly intensive, and it's difficult to imagine to introduce on-field possibilities for higher biodiversity without losing yield. The second point is optimizing trade-offs with high biodiversity and low cost or no cost, which is classically the case in many areas of the global south, where yield gaps are very high. So it's far from optimal production, and you can enhance both biodiversity and productivity at the same time with no big general problems. And the third case is biodiversity as key driver of yield, and then you are in a situation of win-win situations. And this is the case when you have essential ecosystem services provided by biodiversity. Very good examples is crop pollination, but also biological control, and I also will give these examples, and here you show it in this graphic. This formal graphic, you have crop fields here, you have biodiversity there, you can have a win-win situation, it's neutral, or you have a trade-off. I start with this first case. So some time ago, we had a big EU project called Agri-POPES, very nice name, and it was about 9 countries in the EU. We analyzed more than 1,000 wheat fields in agricultural landscapes, which were characterized by management variables and landscape variables. And we were interested in the relationship of yield and biodiversity, and the result is shown here. On the x-axis, always the yield. On the y-axis, the species richness. And you can see here for plants, the steep decrease for carabid beetles, for birds, and the higher survival rate of cereal aphids, maybe the main pests in cereals. So when you double the yield, this implies that you have only half of the plant species, so very steep, a bit nonlinear, but in general, it's doubling yield means having plant species, or you get a third of the carabid beetles, or a third of the bird species. Overall, it was difficult to explain with all these variables, which also has to do with the design, to be honest, but anyway, in the end, it was the pesticide use which were the best fit, but explained only 10% of the variation, which is not a very high value. So, and what type of agricultural intensification plays the biggest role? This is shortly listed here. You have agrochemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, which are well known to reduce biodiversity. You have usually, with the intensification during the last, or in the last decade after the Second World War, you have more and more only few crop species which are dominating. You have large fields. They are steadily, since the 80s or 70s, enlarged. And with land consolidation, you have increasingly monocultures or almost no mixed crops. You have, on a landscape scale, you have the loss of semi-natural habitat, and you have this homogenization, overall homogenization of landscapes. They lose all the heterogeneity, and heterogeneity is known as a main predictor of biodiversity. And of course, there is a lot of public concern, also political concern, and what you see in the EU and also in Germany, that organic farming is seen as a main alternative, as a comprehensive solution with win-win-win effects, and also the agricultural policy, let's say, of the Green Party is very much focused on increasing the amount or the percentage of organic farming. It's the EU Green Deal, 25 organic farming until within the next years. It will be anyway difficult to reach. Now we have less than 10%. But the question is arising, is banning all synthetic agrochemicals, and this makes organic farming, is it really a solution? Is it really the effect? Is it both means both with a win-win-win? It's healthy, it's productive, and it's good for the environment and good for biodiversity. And when you look a bit closer, then you see that in organic farming you have also an increasing intensification. Most people think of organic farms like this Portuguese organic farm. So small-scale cultivation, very idyllic situation of a farm, of a family farm, maybe with direct marketing. But there are also many other situations. For example, especially here also in eastern Germany, you still have very big organic farms. You have huge cereal fields, well nourished, as you can see here with the dark green, and they are maybe 10, 20, 30 hectare big. So the difference to a conventional cereal field is low. And here on the down left, you have a situation of organic production under glass or in the greenhouse. Of course, this has also nothing to do with promoting biodiversity. And kind of the worst are these landscapes that are totally covered with plastic sheets, which you see a lot in the Mediterranean area, particularly very well known from Andalusia. This is a picture from Almeria, where all landscapes, or many landscapes, look like this, but with increasing organic production. So meanwhile, it's by 10, 15% with organic production under these plastic sheets. So when you go in your supermarket, have your nice organic paprika or all type of vegetables, they often come, especially during winter time, fear from such a situation. So we have organic farming, and it's known to enhance biodiversity, here by 34%, but the yields, it's a drawback. The yields are reduced on average by 19 to 25%. In cereals, the productivity is even halved. Organic food is said to be healthier, and I think for many consumers this is the main reason to buy organic food. But even Urs Niggli, former director of the FIBEL, said several times in publications, but also in interviews, that he's also questioning that organic food is per se healthier than conventional food. It's much more a matter of diet, and so to eat the right things, and not the question whether it's organically produced. It's also a myth that on organic farming you have no pesticide use. Pesticide use is still common, not herbicide use, which is a big advantage, let's say. But for example, especially vineyards, for example, and orchards are also in organic production, sometimes sprayed like hell. We have also 20, 30 times per year spraying, especially with copper agents, different copper agents, which accumulate in the soil and are negative for soil life, have many negative influences. This can happen, and they have also pyrethrum, for example, when you pyrethrid a broad-scale insecticide, when it is directly taken from chrysanthemum, from the plant, then it's called a natural pesticide, and it's allowed in organic farming, but the synthetic part of pyrethroids is not allowed, and this is also kind of strange. So it's the difference or the differentiation between natural and synthetic pesticides is kind of one of the many esoteric parts of organic farming. So when you are in a situation, or when you are in a situation, you are in a landscape with yellow here, let's say cereal fields, and just a small patch of natural habitat here in green. You are confronted with many possibilities to enhance biodiversity. One, starting from top, one is the so-called land sparing, which is have a lot of advocates in the UK. There is a plea for intensifying cereal fields extremely, and then you win. And then we have a landscape with the same production as a landscape with full of organic production, but you save a lot of area which you can use for natural habitat in this case. Then you have land sharing, eco-friendly practices, let's say like in organic farming, this is shown here. And then you can also use, the traditional way I would say is from the natural from the conservation point of view is to enhance natural areas, but you can also, of course, have these eco-friendly practices, organic farming, but you can also, and which came up recently much more, and I will come to this in more detail, can also reduce field size on the landscape scale, which has a big positive effect on biodiversity, and you can also enhance crop diversity, which is also well known to enhance biodiversity. These all together make up higher crop heterogeneity, and together with more natural habitat, minimum natural habitat, you have such a mixed land sharing, sparing situation, and especially small field and high crop diversity are measures that you can apply, and they don't reduce productivity or yield. So what you can do to downsize fields, you can also do it, for example, with strip intercropping, what we did in one project, so with conventional machinery, which has already a big effect. Peter Vatari also analyzed the situation in Eastern and West Germany, in Thuringia versus Lower Saxony. And as you can see here, in the East, you still have, from the collectivization in agriculture from the past, you still have very relatively large fields compared to the situation in the West. And he also showed that the difference between field size means field size is more important for biodiversity than organic farming. And this all, when you have a minimum of natural land, 20% of natural land is seen as a threshold, kind of threshold value to have a minimum natural land in your landscape. And then you are on a good side. Land sparing, I said, is a problem with ever-increasing intensification, I would say, because there's also, when you look globally, there's a danger of a rebound effect. Everywhere you can see such rebound effect. So the idea to spare more land for nature is difficult to see. And of course, you also would destroy a wealth of synanthropic species. And in Central Europe, where you have thousands of years of agriculture, you have a lot of species which people like to still have, and which are endangered, and this would be gone. But on the other hand, yield is of course also a critical, or reduced yield is also critical, especially as we then depend more on food import from, especially from biodiversity-rich regions, which are less controlled, and the food production here is also seen critical. So, when it comes to biodiversity conservation, it's important to have a view on the landscape scale. No one species is living only on a cereal field or on a single agricultural patch. Populations can only survive on a larger scale, so whatever measure you are doing, it's important to do it on a large scale to guarantee or to ensure their populations. This has to do with a species pool, with large enough populations that can also stay some climate change, for example, or stand some climate change to survive. And when it comes to increasing this landscape-wide heterogeneity, I think three main parameters are a minimum of semi-natural habitat, let's say 20%, a high crop diversity, and small fields with longer edges, which can, for example, mean 5 times more wild bees compared to large fields, and without even in a conventional setting. Restoration of natural habitat is very important, but it is not part of organic certification, for example. So all natural land is not included in organic certification. So you have when your favorite organic farmer is having fallows or hedgerows, and it is his own decision. And this is also shown by Peter Battari in analysis here, hedge lengths, and here bird species richness. You have a huge increase with the length of hedges in a landscape, for both wheat and for wheat fields and meadows, and the question whether it's organic or conventional plays a minor role, or plays in this case no role at all. It's published also from a big project, farmland project, 8 regions of Europe and Canada. It's explicitly, with an explicit focus, what it means to have small fields compared to large fields. So in each country, there was a comparison of landscapes with the smallest fields that they had, and with large fields. And what you could see here, there's a non-linear relationship between mean field size per landscape and species richness. And you see that it is very important the change between around 6 hectare fields and let's say one hectare fields. So when you have a mean size reduction from 6 hectare fields to 1 hectare field, you have 6 times more species. And this is established in it's the mean of all these countries for bees, birds, butterflies, carabids, plants, spiders, surface, so with a broad scale monitoring of species. Crop diversity doubles, multi-diversity too, but only when you have a minimum of natural habitat. And the problem was also here that in Europe and also in Canada, crop diversity is on a very low level, so it's not such an extreme difference or broad range that could be used for statistics very well. I come to the second point, to optimizing trade-offs with high biodiversity with low or no costs, and start with an example here from vanilla production in agroforestry in Madagascar. Madagascar is the main producer of Bourbon vanilla worldwide, and these are climbers. It's an orchid, and it needs trees or sticks to climb, and it is hand pollinated. But whatever, there are general two situations. Either people, smallholders, thin or destroy or thin the natural forest to grow vanilla inside, or you have a lot of, as it is often in the tropics, a lot of open land of fallows, and you may also plant trees and then cultivate these vanilla inside, which is benefits from shade vanilla growth. Although the general biodiversity is much higher in this situation, of course, politically, from the conservation point of view, is much better to restore these fallows than to degrade even more natural forest. And the result here by Annemarie Wurz in her dissertation shows the relationship of species richness and vanilla yield, and what you can see here for all these organism groups in also multi-diversity analysis, that there is no relationship. Forest conversion is on a higher level than open land conversion, but its yield is not related, and the reason is very simple, that promoting yield and promoting biodiversity can be done by very different measures. For yield, you simply, as is shown, as to enhance the plant density. Plant density is too low. They can plant many more vanilla on the field than it is typically done. For biodiversity, it needs more trees, also in the landscape, and a higher canopy cover, which is not negatively related to vanilla production, so you can do both without any harm. There's a similar situation to agroforests, to cacao agroforests in Indonesia. We started earlier here with Jan Klaff. Yield here on the x-axis, species richness on the y-axis. And you see for all these groups there is no relationship, with the exception of these pantropical weeds, but these are not really important. This is also true also in Madagascar. The no relationship true also for endemic species, not only for overall species richness. But what Jan also found is that cacao also needs some shade, especially when it is young, not later on. And you have the shade tree cover here on the x-axis and the yield here. And you see that especially with the maximum yield and the sucrose model, that in the beginning, so up to 40%, you have almost no change in yield. And this can be kind of exploited also for enhancing biodiversity here, enhancing bird diversity, because bird diversity is enhanced when you consider, when you have not shade and canopy cover by just one species of trees, by several species, and when you also have tall trees included, so improving the shade quality, not affecting the yield, but greatly increasing biodiversity of birds. Similar situation, also oil palm in Indonesia, is a recent study in Sumatra and just published this year by Clara Semp. So typically it's really terrible to see these oil palm plantations, but we established here islands of different sizes with different numbers of species inside these oil palm plantations. So we cut oil palm and planted different tree species inside. And it was a big surprise to see that the yield did not suffer, because oil palms are usually obviously planted too densely, and reducing these oil palms meant that the higher light income led to higher productivity of the remaining oil palm trees. So you had also enhanced and very much enhanced biodiversity. I don't show the picture, and no cost for the yield. Now, the third option, biodiversity is key driver of yields, win-win situations, when you have species that provide key services. One is this, meanwhile, seminal study by Alexandra Klein on, she analyzed the 150 most important crops globally, and found that 35% of global human food supply is influenced by pollination. This has a big annual value here, several hundred of billion US dollars. And this is, so this is clear. You need these pollinators when you have pollinator-dependent crops to increase yield. They must survive. They must be there not only in the situation of flowering of the crop, but also over the whole year. So it needs some effort to keep them in the system or in the landscape. And it also increases quality. When you have well-pollinated strawberries, for example, then you have, the color is better, the brightness. You have a changed chemical content, and the shelf life is, in particular, it's enhanced, so which is also increasing market value. And this is also shown for apples, for example, cucumber, that you have also quality changes by good pollination. And often it's not just the bee abundance, so the number of flower visitation, but also the diversity, the species richness, that plays a big role, which has been shown in our situation for coffee and also for pumpkin. Biological pest control can be also important. We have also a big project, EU project on that, showing that here when you exclude, for example, in cereal fields, the naturally occurring enemies, these are mainly parasitoids, ladybird beetles and carabids and spiders on the ground, and you can exclude these guys, and then you have across Europe, you have 3 times higher aphid densities, showing that even in conventional fields, you have a background predation, which is important as it stabilizes the situation of biological control at a certain level. And what you also see in these EU projects, that a certain functional redundancy is needed. So, for example, parasitic wasp parasitoids were extremely important in Poland and also around Göttingen. For example, in Sweden, especially the ladybird beetles were important. In Ireland, most of the effect was done by particular carabid species, showing it's good to have many species, because in case of a changing environment, different species come into place. In a very early study already in 1999, we showed that landscapes which have a lot of natural habitat, they have a lot of biological control of the red pollen beetle, which is a most important pest insect, and it can heavily decrease. So only on a landscape level, in conventional oilseed rape, you have a sharp decrease in rapeseed damage, and this is due to the increase in parasitism, which is very effective. Birds and bats are, especially bats, are in the past underestimated by biocontrol agents. Here, Carolina just showed that when you exclude birds and bats in cacao, you have when you exclude, you have half of the yield that you could have when birds and bats have excess, because they have such a dominant influence. This is also known also from other systems, also here in not only in, this is from Peru, but it's also found, we also found it in Indonesia. Exclusion of ants have a 27% reduced cacao. They also are contributing. You have, and of course, cacao is very much limited by cacao pollination, so that hand pollination has a big effect. Macadamia forest is a similar situation. When you exclude birds and bats, you have a much reduced yield. There's an interesting effect when you have these cages in macadamia and you exclude birds and bats, you also exclude the monkeys. The monkeys are raiding, and they also, when you have the open situation, they also come in and crack these macadamia fruits. But still, even when you consider this damage by monkeys, you have a positive effect by birds and bats. So you had these different possibilities: win-win, neutral, and trade-off. And this is a short summary. Enhancing biodiversity at the cost of productivity is a typical case here. Very important to keep in mind that landscape heterogeneity is a key. So whatever you are doing, you need to do it on a landscape scale. To have just one small field is not such effective. You need it on a landscape scale, and also the same applies for crop diversity. And when you see it positive, you can see it negative with organic certification, but in a positive way, you would say certification, EU needs targeted biodiversity-friendly measures, which are lacking so far. There is no need to diversify their fields, no need to have natural habitat, and so forth. This is, would be an important point. Optimizing trade-offs. I showed just this example from vanilla, cacao, and oil palm, where improving the yield in the situations of high yield gaps can be more or less easily done, and at the same time you can do it in a way that also biodiversity is benefiting, and crop pollination and pest control are typically examples of species and species richness, which is important for higher yield. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Teja. Now we'll take some questions. Was that 1, 2, 3?
Just fantastic talk. Thank you so much. I learned so much. When we come to think in Europe and the small fields, I can already hear the farmers shouting about the economic and transaction, the cost. So what do we need to do? Are we going back to Sentol's keynote talk about the use of automation and drones to be able to make small fields work in this setting? Have you done the economics of the small fields to make sure it will work for our farmers? Thank you.
Yeah, in these studies comparing Thuringia with Lower Saxony, so this Eastern, Western Germany in comparison, we did this, and this is 50% more expensive, the labor costs, yeah. So it has a reason that farmers enlarge larger fields. So it's technically, it's it costs more, but the productivity is the same, you know, in small fields. There's even this paradox of scale on a global scale. Often people think that larger fields are more productive. This is not the case. On a global scale, small-scale agriculture is more productive than large-scale agriculture. But of course, large-scale means less effort, it's applicable for large machinery, etc. And this is so. If you want to go to small fields, you need to change a lot. But of course, you can also have small fields like a towel. So just as broad as with traditional machinery, then you have even more edges, which are very important for connectivity in the landscape, because many species, especially insects, are orientating along the edges, independent of whether they are natural edges or not. Simply the edge is an important visual orientation.
Hello, thank you. Wonderful presentation. Qiang Yi from the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences. I have two questions, very simple, both related to terminology. The first is that you talked about biodiversity and crop diversity. Do you think it is a strong relationship between crop diversity and biodiversity? And the second question is about the term diversification and fragmentation. You know, when we talk about diversification, it's almost, let's say, positive, right? But fragmentation, sometimes it's neutral or even negative from the geographic perspective. So what do you think about these terminologies? And you know, there are, in developing countries, a lot of countries encourage the land consolidation that's combined the fragmented field sizes to larger sizes. So this is just related to the previous question. Okay, these two. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your question. The crop diversity is positively related to biodiversity. Is shown by, meanwhile, many meta-analyses and reviews. So this is a very, very clear effect, and it makes also in general sense. When you have more heterogeneity, more, let's say, food plants, more different situations for organisms, then you have higher biodiversity. So this is also what you may generally expect. I'm sorry, I didn't get the second question. So correct.
Consolidation.
Consolidation. Yeah.
And the fact that they have land consolidation when you're asking for fragmentation.
Yeah. This land consolidation, for example, in Germany, but also elsewhere, led to the destruction of hedges, of natural habitat in between, also of wetlands, so small ponds, for example, which were very typical all over Central Europe decades ago, are completely gone. And so this land consolidation had a big effect, and it is partly reversed in certain regions. But this makes these homogenized landscapes, which are not feasible, not suitable for biodiversity in general. Especially lacking trees, for example, for birds, they're very important. But on the other hand, also farmers are very much afraid about these permanent structures. So farmers usually they like flower strips because they are annual or biannual, and they can easily be removed. But also from these agro-environmental schemes in the past, you can see that they are very reluctant to do something which also abandonment of fields for the next 20 years. Nobody took up this offer. And the same is also with hedges, because when you have them, you are not allowed to erode them, and then you have in changing market situations, you have a problem as a farmer.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wonder if working on smaller fields might not also provide a little more enjoyment in farming. And you may laugh, it's a very idyllic image, but in today's world, especially in the West, farmers are not farmers because they want to make money by and large, but because they love farming, right? And is it maybe not also a way to say, hey, you know, you could have a more pleasant time working your farm? Could there not be an incentive to kind of promote smaller field sizes?
Yeah, definitely this happens here and there, but of course farming is a business. Farmer and their families want to make their life out of it, and a good life, so that the income level is important. I think yield is often, although yield is central often in the discussion, it's more about the net revenues that they get out of their farm. And then, of course, smaller fields are more costly. And but given this extremely positive effect of small fields on the landscape scale, it's certainly something what should be more considered by the EU in their agro-environmental schemes. And the same is also true for crop diversity. It's also a shame also for organic farming certification that crop diversification doesn't play a role. There's a meta-analysis on a global level that just crop cycles are just 15% longer in organic farming compared to conventional farming on average. This is not really much, I must say. And so there's much room for improvement. Or you do it, I think there are several reasons, and we had a lot of discussions during this conference, a lot of reasons also to change the labeling more to a more better science-based basis.
Okay, I'm going to have to take the last three questions. That would be you and Frank. And sorry, it's a success for Teja's presentation, but we're running over time. So please go ahead.
Hello, so thank you very much for your presentation. So you spoke about biodiversity in general in your talk, and I was wondering how the measures that you talked about, like heterogeneity and so on, would affect generalist versus specialist species. If you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
What would they?
It's just talking about the different generalist versus specific species in splitting biodiversity.
Yeah, that's of course, you're right, it's a big point. So when it comes to the tropics, where you have a lot of endemic species, we always check that. And in all these cases, also we analyzed also not only overall species richness, but also endemic species richness. And this was also the case. Here you must say that, let's say, on the field, often you have very common species only. Let's say synanthropic species and lots of rare species. I didn't go into detail with, I think I even skipped one slide. It's also for pollination, for example, for bees, as you may know, when you look at those bees that are important for the wild bees, that are important for crop pollination, these are maybe something like 10% maximum of all bee species. So 90% of all bee species never show up in agricultural land. So when you want to really protect this overall biodiversity, you need to have targeted measures for these species, and this means simply protecting natural land. And this is definitely one, even in agricultural landscapes, one of the most important point.
Thank you.
So now, yes, I enjoyed your presentation a lot, but still now I want to be a little bit provocative here I am. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So I want to be a little bit provocative and questioning your framing of the yield gap. You showed us in one of the first slides how much the yield level is related, or the biodiversity decline is related to the yield level. And later, when you showed the slides about the pollinations, you showed us the strawberry example, where we saw that, of course, pollinators are important, but still, more than 50% of what has been grown there doesn't end up finally on the plate. And I think that we all know that one of the main levers for, if we really consider area productivity in the entire system, is the pre-process or the pre-harvesting, the post-harvesting losses, the processing losses, the losses along the entire chain. And of course, this entire logistic system is also different in organic farming, or at least in parts of organic farming, I think. And now we talk here about regionalization. So are you aware of any publications which do not relate biodiversity to field or to farm, but to plate? So to see whether, considering the entire system, we could work, or we could easily have a higher degree of biodiversity when not trying to achieve this high yields, but changing a lot within the entire value chain organization.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and you're right. It's just here pointing to a certain aspect. Of course, when you start with a field, where you have these high losses by pests and diseases, which make up, let's say, globally something like 30–40% already. Then you have these harvesting losses, which can be harvest losses, can be extreme, and so forth. So I have a long chain of losses up to the food that is not consumed but ends up in a garbage. This is definitely a critical situation, and I don't have the real solution for that. And you have extreme losses on the way from the field, from sowing up to the plate, as you say, up to the point that it is available for everybody. Yeah, and you can, of course, everybody always there's a need to improve the situation, to reduce pests and diseases, to reduce harvest losses, to have markets nearby, which is especially a problem in the tropics, that you have markets where you can sell your products, etc. Then you have also these marketing losses, also financially. No, I'm not aware of such a paper.
Yes, thanks a lot, Teja, for the impressive collection of your work. I have two short questions, actually. One is you focused very much on the relationship between biodiversity and yield, but there are also other aspects to consider. We heard about economy. We talk a lot about natural resource use efficiency, carbon neutrality, carbon sequestration in the context, resilience to climate change. Did you also look into those? I understand that's quite complex. Or perhaps you can refer to studies that have tried to even have a broader view. First question. Second is coming back to the labeling. How do we move ahead with that in order to take advantage of these insights? Are we sort of going through improving the environmental schemes, or are there labels around that could be improved? You work in an agroecology group. We have agroecological agriculture. What is your take on that?
You're right. There are many problems involved, but also with reference to organic farming. For example, one of the wins in organic farming is also the reduced CO2 emission. But this is also on a very low level, so it's better to have a hedge on your organic farm than to, let's say, a hedge on your conventional farm than to transform to organic farming when it comes to CO2 emissions. So it's definitely it's all a critical thing. I think Robert, in his many talks these days, also emphasized a lot of what can be done also in terms of, and others also what can be done in terms of certification, and then often it's about a biodiversity-friendly label. There are bird-friendly labels in the US, which is very which is a kind of very convincing. So bird-friendly coffee, because they are arguing that that's a bird. They are hibernating in the south in agroforestry systems like coffee agroforestry. When you want to avoid the silent spring in North America, you have to buy bird-friendly coffee. I think this is convincing many consumers. But I could also think of a biodiversity-friendly certification with respect to, for example, for pesticides. It's also the more you dig into this, it's, as I said, it makes no sense to separate natural and synthetic pesticides. It's better to focus on low risk pesticides. For example, it has been shown that certain fungicides might be much better to control pathogens in vegetables or in orchards or in vineyards than copper agents. But but they have a very negative image, and so this also need to be changed. I think this is a lot of work, and it's a lot of work which needs attention by policy, by social research to have these changes. I think that the very positive effect of organic farming is that people trust so much in organic farming. Positive in the sense that they rely on that, and it took a long time to have this trust and to have this as a mainstream labeling. And I'm afraid that it is very difficult to change this system. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much to both speakers. And I guess Teja's address suggests a topic for the next landscape conference that is beyond organic.